Welcome to Parenthood Bites, the podcast where we explore life as a parent in tech. I'm your host, Chow, and I have over 15 years of experience in tech, and I'm also currently working as a career coach. I'm the proud mother of 3 incredible boys. In each episode, we have an inspiring guest who will share their remarkable story. You'll find their wisdom and insights both relatable and enriching, because after all, we're all in this parenting journey together. So grab your favorite drink, get cozy, and let's dive into today's episode. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 27 of Parenthood Bites. We're here today with Tameez Sunderji, who is a VP of Product in the Bay Area. Hi Tameez, how are you?
Hey, Chow. Good to speak with you.
Yeah, good to speak with you. And we were emailing before this, and you said you're on your year of adventure. How did that come about, and where are you now?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I'm doing this call with you from Albania over in Eastern Europe. So um, I did not have this on my 2024 bingo card. That would be in Albania, but here we are. The way in which we ended up here was basically, I think it's always been a dream of ours to do sort of a sabbatical year, a year abroad. And my daughter, who's 10, we also figure we have a very small window before she doesn't want to hang out with us anymore. So we figured this was the year to make it happen. So all the stars aligned. We found a few other families and a teacher who we're traveling with. So Layla's getting sort of schooling every day as we travel across these different locations across Europe. And it's been a fantastic experience so far. So I think the big challenge is going to be acclimating back to the real world, after this is all over.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So the teacher agreed to go with you all to all these different countries?
That's right. Yeah. So the lady who's organizing it has participated in something similar before and decided to organize her own. And there's about 6 families and about 11 kids and a teacher who is a very experienced teacher. She's fantastic, spent a lot of time teaching in the Denver school system. She's taught abroad and she's, taken the leap of faith and joined us on this adventure across all these countries. So it's been pretty amazing.
Wow, that's so neat. And how long do you stay in each country?
We do about 5 weeks per session, and each session is in a different location. Sometimes we do 2 different locations in the same country. So in the fall, when we started this, we did a location in Italy in the north, in Torino, and then down in the south of Italy. So we did 5 weeks up north, 5 weeks down south. So every 5 weeks, we jump location, and then a week break in between so that families have the ability to travel and go see other things as we're traveling around too, because the day-to-day, because the kids are in school, is actually not too different from day-to-day life than it would be at home. A lot of the parents are working remotely or doing their thing. The kids are at school. So for us to get to really have some time to travel as a family, they have these week breaks in between each session and obviously the weekends.
Wow, that's so cool. And did you plan out the countries you would go to before you went?
Yeah, that was primarily the organizer's job, was to figure out which countries we were going to go to. And so she takes on the heavy lifting of figuring out what are some interesting places we could go, that are relatively affordable. London's a fantastic city, but we're probably not going to spend, 5 weeks in London just because of the cost of being in a city like that. So it's been kind of nice because a lot of the places we've ended up, Albania included, were places that I probably wouldn't have prioritized otherwise to visit, and it's been absolutely fantastic to discover these amazing places that might not have gone to otherwise. So it's been fantastic. She's done a really good job of organizing it, choosing some great locations, and choosing some great families and a great teacher to have this adventure with. It's a bit of a leap of faith. It's like joining a startup, right? It's a big leap of faith.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's an adventure.
And it's an adventure,
So,
yes. But a lot more highs and lows in this adventure versus startup life.
yeah, for sure. And how did you find her?
Uh, it was essentially a Facebook ad we responded to. So
Oh,
despite all the things you hear about the internet and how it's, this trashy dystopia, the internet is actually a really amazing place and really positive things happen on the internet too. So yeah, we responded to this ad. We got to FaceTime with her and get to meet her. We got some really solid vibes from her. Then we got to speak with the teacher later, and it just felt like there was a connection there, that these were really solid individuals and that they were going to also find other good families. So it's been fantastic.
That's great. So I think two things, right? One is Facebook ads do work, and two is I'll
Dude,
probably get this in, yeah, I'll probably get this in my Facebook feed after this conversation.
yes, we can test how much they're listening.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned you have one daughter, 10 years old.
I have a 10-year-old daughter, exactly. Which makes it easier, I think, to do something like this when you only have the needs of one child to account for. There are some families who have, two kids who are doing it, but no families with bigger families than that. So, yeah, that makes it easy for us.
Yeah, for sure. So what brought you to tech and how many years were you in tech when you became a parent?
Great question. So, I joined tech back in like 2009 when I moved to the Bay Area. So, in my previous life, I was actually living on the East Coast in the Boston area and in London, and I was doing management consulting. And so, when I moved to the Bay Area, tech seemed like the thing to do. And I had actually connected with a previous client of mine who was working at a tech company in the Bay Area. Tech wasn't really even on my radar at all, but it seemed like the thing to do once you're in California, especially Northern California. So I ended up joining a company that was called Macrovision at the time. They rebranded to Rovi, and now they're sort of merged with TiVo. And I started out doing sort of business analysis, pricing analysis type roles and supporting functions like investor relations and the sales team and all these different teams within the organization who are looking to analyze different pricing deals, deal structures, and whatnot, which was a natural transition for me, sort of working in management consulting and being a bit of a spreadsheet jockey. So that's how I got into the world of tech. And then I made the transition into product probably a couple of years into it. I found the role was a little bit limiting, what I was doing in terms of business analysis. And I did engineering as an undergrad. So my boss basically encouraged me to make the switch into product management. And at that point, I was working on API platforms and things like that before they were sort of cool. So that was a really fun intro to the world of tech. And I've been drinking the Kool-Aid ever since.
What excited you about product?
I loved it. As someone who did engineering in undergrad but had not coded in a long time, I still had a deep appreciation for the technology and liked to shape things. So I loved working with engineers and helping shape product. I liked sort of working in that interdisciplinary fashion across all the different functional areas of the company. I just love it. It's an extremely challenging role because it's like trying to solve a multivariate equation in your head all the time. But it's so gratifying when you actually get to build something, ship it, see people use it, and ideally, they're getting a lot of value out of it as well. So I love the role tremendously.
That's awesome. So were you already in product when you became a parent?
I was, yes, I was still at Rovi at the time when I became a parent. That was an interesting time. I had like a lot of things going on that year. I think we bought a new house that year, and like I had surgery that year, and it was a lot going on that year. So why not have a kid on top of
Might as
everything
well,
else, right?
right? Hit all the milestones.
Exactly.
So what was parental leave like over there?
Rovi, it was funny. I think it was pretty standard. What I recall from it was a while ago. Obviously, it was like 10 years ago. What I recall from it was like pretty standard, probably like 4 weeks ish or something like that. I remember I didn't take all of it. I don't think. I remember I took a very limited amount of time for parental leave. Part of the reason for that was because we had totally miscalculated everything. My daughter came 6 weeks earlier than expected, so
Oh, wow.
it just threw all our plans, awry. She was originally supposed to be due in like mid-January, and we were like, okay, we're going to get things ready over the Christmas holidays. We had it all planned out. And of course, nature messes with your plans all the time. So because she arrived in early December, then we were sort of scrambling to get things ready during the holidays. And I returned to work, I think, shortly afterwards in January. So they had a, pretty average parental leave policy from what I can recall. I remember I didn't take that much of it. But I also recall that they had, pretty good policies generally around like health insurance and things like that. I remember like getting these bills from the hospital, and you see the itemized list of how much everything costs, and your mind sort of explodes and your jaw drops. And then, your portion is like, $200 or something. I was like, okay, that's cool. So they did have very good employee benefits generally.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I remember seeing those bills and I'm like, oh my God, $10,000. And then it's like, how much you
Right.
pay? And you're like, Whew,
Phew.
thank goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little
Yeah.
bit frightening to know that someone is paying that supposedly somewhere in the system.
Right.
So
Yeah, yeah. And then you realize, like, wow, it costs a lot to have a baby, right?
it does. It does.
So, since you didn't take the whole time and you went back to work after the holidays, was it like a easy transition back to work?
It was a pretty easy transition back to work, especially because of the December holidays. Things obviously slowed down at work. And so it was pretty natural. I didn't feel like I had missed out on a ton when I transitioned back for me personally. Now, ask me that question when I transition back to work after this year off, and that'll be probably a vastly
Yeah.
different answer.
Yeah, a few weeks versus a year, right? That's a huge difference.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you recall, was there a mother's room at your work?
That is a great question, Chal. I think there was like a temporary makeshift one, like you see at a lot of places,
Yeah.
not a permanent one. And I mean, I think one thing that I have noticed though is like since then, which is a while ago now, like I feel like generally a lot of organizations have progressed in terms of the types of benefits they offer. And even startups, like the startup I was at most recently, even though we were primarily sort of like a bootstrapped little startup building AI software, they're very generous in terms of the parental leave they'd provide and the support they provide. So I thought that was really great to see that kind of progress happening. And it seems more common now, which is great to see. I know we're pretty spoiled being in tech because that's probably not the norm across corporate America. But at least in our corner of the world, it's good to see these things moving forward.
Yeah, yeah, that's great to hear, especially like startups, because a lot of times it's like, hey, if it's not a need, they might not have it yet. But to hear that they had that and the benefits, that's really amazing.
Totally, and especially for a bootstrap startup where money is very precious. It's an existential roller coaster ride all the time. So it's nice to see people try and do the right thing by employees.
Yeah, for sure. So before your year of adventure, what did you do for childcare for your daughter?
Yeah, so we've been lucky. When we had our daughter in, 10 years ago, we made the move. We were living in San Francisco at the time, and we actually moved out to the East Bay where my wife's family lives and where she grew up. So it was nice to have that support system around us. Making that flight to suburbia was like a little bit difficult for us, I think, mentally, but it was nice to know that there's a support system there. And so my wife's parents ended up doing a lot of childcare during that time period. And then my wife, reduced her time commitment at work to half time so that she could spend more time doing child rearing as well. So between those two things, that helped us tremendously. And obviously having one child goes a long way too in terms of the amount of support you need.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So how has your work life changed since you became a parent?
It's gotten crazier. I mean, I think, and you know this just as well as I do, which is, working in tech is a very demanding job, whether you're in an engineering function, whether you're in a product function, whether you're in a sales function. I think everyone finds it extremely demanding. It's very exciting work, but it's, very taxing in terms of like the amount of emotional investment, the amount of intellectual investment your day to day brings about. So on top of it, having a kid where, especially in the early years, the first couple of years in particular, very sleep deprived.
Yeah.
There's a lot of needs in terms of keeping this being alive and thriving. So it's hard. It's hard, right? There's no way to sugarcoat it. But you also manage just the way you sort of manage through anything, when life throws it at you. So we were very fortunate to have, family nearby that we didn't have to sort of worry about nannies or daycare or things like that. And I've heard some real horror stories from people, especially in the Bay Area, where those things seem to be in very short supply, and people churning through nannies. It can be very challenging and stressful. So fortunately, we were able to avoid that.
Yeah, yeah. We went through, I think, three nannies before we found our final nanny.
Oh man.
And I think our one of our nannies, she like quit a week before my second kid was born. So we had it all planned, and then she quit
Oh,
and we
good
were like,
timing.
oh
Yeah,
God. So we were just like you said, we make it work, but you struggle in the process.
you struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. In my first one, we had found a daycare for him after going through different daycares to find the right one. We found a good one. And then, like, one
Okay.
day they just shut down because a shelf collapsed and fell on a kid while they were sleeping during nap time.
Oh my
So,
god.
yeah, so we found out that, like, to accommodate more kids than they legally should have, they added like extra shelves,
Hmm.
extra toilets, just extra things in the building that they shouldn't have.
Right.
So, you know,
Yeah.
and then it just closed, and the matter of a day, like as they should, because that shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And then we were scrambling to find another
Yeah.
daycare for him. And like you said, it's just,
Oh my
there's wait
goodness.
lists everywhere. So yeah, so you were definitely lucky
Yeah.
to have family to help with that for sure.
Yeah, and I've heard similar stories from other families and parents in the Bay Area. It seems like a real struggle to find adequate care for your child.
Yeah, especially because it's your kid, right? So you want to find a place that's really good. And we thought we did our due diligence, but we didn't know that, they had broke all
Absolutely.
these
I'm
codes.
sure you've already got your summer camps lined up for this summer.
Yeah, it's like you got to get everything lined up early, right? Or else it's just,
Right.
yeah, it's
Exactly.
slim pickings at the end if you start late.
Yes. That's one of our hobbies in the
Yeah,
Bay Area.
right. So, what has been your biggest struggle as a parent in tech?
As a parent in tech, I think one of the challenges I personally had was just presence. Especially working in tech and startups, where it's this sort of existential roller coaster ride pretty much every day. I remember days where it was like hour by hour, my emotions would fluctuate quite a bit. And so, when you come home, ideally, you're not supposed to bring that stuff with you, but it's really hard not to.
Yeah.
So that's something I struggled with, was just like being able to create that sort of separation between those two things, and then just be mentally present, for my family, and not sort of want to talk about work or event, or, like try to talk things out aloud from what was going on that day. So that, I think, is a big struggle, as well as obviously the time management aspect, right? It's also hard, I think, when you come home, you've been in meetings all day, and then it feels like, oh, at 5 p.m. I can start my real work. So things like that, emails coming in throughout the evening, and balancing those demands while, you're supposed to be spending time with your family. So I think that part of it is always a struggle.
Yeah. What worked for you to kind of separate work and life?
I think for me, a few things that helped was just having a few rituals. So whether that's, bedtime reading with my daughter, which I still do even today, those rituals I think really help, because they kind of like help you focus on the moment. It's hard to sort of like be too distracted as you're reading, a book to somebody, although it's surprising how well you can actually do that too. You're reading the words aloud, but your mind is somewhere
Right,
else as you
right.
actually do that. Or playing board games or things like that. So, trying to actually do activities together, I find was like really helpful to just keep me present and actually engage with my family. And it's, obviously a source of joy too, for me personally, to like be able to spend that kind of time with my daughter. And I enjoy it quite a bit. I always tell my friends who have always wavered on, having kids, or like what it's like as they grow up. And I'm like, it just gets better. It just gets better. Every year they get to be more interesting, more independent people that you just really enjoy spending time with, right? And I'm sure when she turns into a teenager, it's all going to go out the window, but for now it's awesome.
Go out the window for a little bit, right? And then after teenage years, it
Right,
goes back.
yes.
At least that's what I hear.
That's right. That's what I hear too. Eventually one day she'll come back and be like, Dad was right about
Yeah.
that.
You just wait for that moment, right?
Right, exactly. Incept him now.
Yeah. So, what do you struggle with her current age of 10 years old?
I don't think there's too much struggle. She's a pretty good kid. She's funny. She's fun. I like hanging out with her. One thing I noticed, I don't think it's a struggle, but sometimes you often wonder, is this just my kid who acts this way?
Yeah.
And then other parents, you'll talk to them and their kids are doing the exact same thing. And it's just so much of a relief. You're like, okay, that's just a normal thing that kids of this age do.
Yeah.
But it hasn't really been too many struggles. I mean, part of it, I think, especially this year, one of the nice things is that it's really sort of, on top of obviously the traveling is interesting and fun, but like having this like really tight knit community that we're traveling with really goes a long way. So one of the nice things is that, after school, for example, people aren't rushing off to piano lessons or this or that. Like there's a lot of very sort of like free time for the kids to just enjoy being together. So whether that's, going to the beach together, after school and playing on the beach until sunset, or having movie nights over at one of the parents' places, or sleepovers. There's a nice tight community, and it feels like a very sort of wholesome childhood, and like more reminiscent of the childhoods that I had, and I think people of our generation had growing up. So that's nice, screen times, just more like organic play with each other, which is great, and I think healthy and important for kids.
Yeah, that is really great. And like, is she really enjoying this year abroad?
She is, yeah, very much so. Partially because of the school format, her friends. Yeah, she's really loving it. Yeah, it's great.
That's awesome. Does she have a favorite country so far that you visited?
Italy for sure, because like, what kid doesn't love like pizza, pasta, and gelato, right? It's like you got the trifecta there. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think they do absorb. It's funny because like you take them to all these places. There's a lot of very interesting history, but they're also, kids, right? They're
Right.
not that interested in all of this, but I think it's again, some of this stuff gets incepted into their heads, right? So, we're in Albania now, and Albania, I don't know how much you know about the country, but it had like a really interesting recent history where, they lived and suffered through, a communist dictatorship for a few decades, came out of that in the 90s, but still had some, troubles as they sort of adjusted to life under democratic capitalism. Some really interesting histories, and so it's, I think, interesting for kids to be exposed to these things, and the history becomes more alive when you're actually in the place and you get to see the museums and you get to see that history. So whether it's seeing art museums in Italy or being able to see these communist museums here in Albania, like I think they do soak in some of it and do remember a lot of what they have been exposed to, much more so than if they were just, reading it in a book, for example.
Yeah, yeah, that is really neat. And so are
Yeah.
you also like exposing her to like the different foods of the different countries? Because I know when I took my kids to like Japan and Singapore, they were like, we want to try McDonald's. And so, so, so I was curious about other parents take kids to other countries.
Yeah. Yes, we have been. And actually the teacher is great. So, one of the other things she'll try to organize is like cooking classes at, some of the different countries we've been in. So this doesn't happen in every country, but certainly in Morocco when we were there was like cooking classes where they made some, tagines. And I think the kids get a kick of like actually preparing and then eating the food, because whenever I ask her like, what was the best meal you had in the country? She's like, oh, it was the one that we made that day at school. That was definitely the best food we ever had. Regardless of what other restaurants you go to. But that's great that they actually enjoyed the process of making the food and then enjoying it together. So in Morocco and in Albania, they've certainly done that. And they've also cooked, foods. Actually, they did cook food in Italy as well. So yeah, it's just part of the thing where they get to explore the culture as well as, the history and other aspects of the country they visit.
It's really neat. And my kids too, when they're cooking something, that's when they want to eat the most of it, right? Even if it's something they normally don't really want to eat, but
Right.
if they made it, they definitely enjoy it.
Yes, exactly. Then it's good
Yeah,
stuff.
not so much.
Mom and dad made it. I don't know,
But
maybe
when
not.
I made it, that's a whole different story.
Exactly. That's right. You know how it goes, Chow.
Yeah. So, what's something that you do to unwind or relax?
Oh, geez. I've been terrible at this. And actually, it's funny because, like, this year has really highlighted to me just how much I haven't really developed hobbies for myself. Like, I think the process of, like, working at, startups as well as, like, raising kids, that's like most of my life, really. And so, as I have a little bit more time on my hands here, I'm like, oh, I don't really have any hobbies or things I, actually want to invest my time into. So it's been good to like help me recognize that. I've been reading a little bit more. I haven't read like a fiction book in ages, but I just finished, a fiction book recently that I really enjoyed. And I was like, I should do more of this. It's a little bit like waking up early in the mornings. Like I'm not normally a early morning person, but every time I do it, I'm like, this is fantastic. I should do more of this.
So much time.
Right? I feel so productive.
Yeah. So, when she's in school, are you also working or you're like exploring and doing other things?
Yeah, it's been a combination of things. A little bit exploring, a little bit like reading, going to museums. Sometimes we help chaperone some of the trips that the kids have. I had the opportunity to teach a little bit at the school too. So when we were in Italy and in Morocco, I was running some after school sort of math and computer science classes for the
Oh,
kids and teaching them
wow.
some coding and stuff. So it scratched that itch of mine that, has always wanted to be a teacher in some form
Yeah,
too. So that's been awesome and a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. So it's been nice to just explore these other, dimensions to myself that you are probably latent and you haven't given them enough sort of nurturing when you're in your sort of day to day, corporate life or startup life. So that's been nice.
for sure. And I mean, you touched on something when you mentioned like no hobbies. Because when people ask me, what do you like to do? I'm like, I don't know, but I could tell you what my kids like to do. you know?
Right.
It's like I watch TV, but I don't really have a hobby, you know? So,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad I'm not the only one.
yeah, yeah.
Have you and have you actually developed any recently or thought about exploring some more? I mean, the podcasting thing is pretty cool,
Yeah, I feel like now I'm like, "Oh, well, I have a podcast." That's my
right?
answer. Because I
It's a good
also
answer.
haven't really, yeah, haven't really developed a hobby, you know, because I feel like in the day to day, we don't really have time also to develop something, you know, because when you
Yeah.
start something, then it's like, oh, I got to go cook or, oh, I got to go do this for the kids. And so you
Yep.
forget.
Yeah. Cooking is another one I've tried to do a little bit more of while I've been here. So, especially as we go to different countries, let me make at least one dish that's, native to this country. It was like my goal initially. I haven't done it in Albania yet, but the food is like so cheap here, it feels almost not worth trying to
Yeah,
cook.
that's cool. So do you get like a hotel or do you get an Airbnb with a kitchen and stuff?
Normally, everyone sorts out their own accommodations, and normally we just, find an Airbnb or a similar type of rental situation. So that it's worked out pretty well so far. You do have to. It's also part of the adventure of traveling, which is, when we were in Italy, we had a one bedroom. Our daughter was like staying on a sofa bed in the middle of the living room, like just like yeah, suck it up for 5 weeks. It's fine. We'll all get through it. So that's been nice. And then there's been, when we were in Morocco, there was like tons of power outages throughout the day and things like that. And it's good to just it's given me a real appreciation for like I know it's very fashionable to like crap on America these days, but it's also given me like a lot of appreciation for like how awesome it is for us life back home and how much we take all those things for granted, right? You're just being able to walk into like supermarkets and have all this abundance or having Target and things like that at our disposal. It's we live pretty well over there generally.
Yeah, and Costco. Are there Costcos over there?
Costco's. There's not Costco here, but a friend of mine told me a funny story about the Costco she visited in Scotland, where they have these unique items on their menu there, and there's this one like giant cookie I think she was talking about that is just like divine that everyone needs to go try, and it looks horrific, and you're like I would never try that thing, but once you take a bite, you're hooked.
I'll have to try that. I'm in like
Yeah,
Costco Facebook groups. Of course I am. And they show like,
really?
yeah, and people go to different Costco's like China, Hawaii, different ones. And then they'll post pictures of like the
Oh,
stuff they
okay.
sell there and the stuff in the food
Yeah.
court. And I'm always like fascinated. I'm like, oh, I gotta go. I gotta go to Costco in these different countries.
What's an item you've seen that we don't get in American Costco's that you need to get?
Like in the Hawaii Costco's, right? They have
Yeah.
different flavors of Spam. They
Oh,
have
sure.
different, like, different types of macadamia nuts. Of course they do, right? And like
Yeah,
different kinds
yeah,
of food. And I'm like, oh wow. And then like in Costco in like China or something, they'll have like Chinese food in the food court.
yeah,
Whereas, over here, or like they'll have hot dog, but then it's like topped with different types of toppings.
yeah.
And I'm like,
Oh, nice.
wow, this is definitely not what we have here, right? We don't even have the Polish dogs anymore.
I see a new hobby emerging.
Now, for your remaining countries, sounds like you need to visit the Costco's there
Yeah,
while your daughter's in school.
I think I might have to. The other one that's who got me on the food topic is like I don't know if you've noticed it, but when you go to other countries, like the Lay's potato chips
Yeah,
and the different flavors you get. So I know there's like a ton of like Asian flavors that we experienced when we were in Vancouver, and
yeah,
like similarly here, there's all sorts of like weird flavors you can find. It's awesome. I love
yeah.
it.
That's pretty amazing. And also, even the McDonald's, right? Because obviously, like I said,
Totally.
my kids want to go
Yes.
to McDonald's and then they're like, "Oh, the bread is different." Like over here you have like
Yeah.
the McMuffin and for breakfast, right? And the biscuit.
Yeah.
And like in Japan they have like the burger bread, the soft bread for breakfast.
Oh,
Yeah, and they're
okay.
like, "Oh my god, this is so
Nice.
good." Like, yes, of course. And then they have like
It
the
doesn't
different
take much, right?
pies, right? Like the taro pie.
Yeah.
And like in Taiwan they have corn soup, which is really good.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Why don't they have
Yeah.
that here?"
Ooh, corn soup. I like that.
Right? Yeah.
And they often like look way fancier too. Like we popped because we haven't eaten at McDonald's in every country we've visited, but I feel like we've popped into one at least to
Uh-huh.
see like what sort of unique menu items they have. And we went to one in Budapest in Hungary, and yeah, it looks so fancy in there. It just feels like it was like looked like an airport lounge, like a fancy airport lounge was like the vibe of the McDonald's, and we're like, this is cool. I would totally like hang out here.
It's not like a fast food chain here, right? Like not like a
Yeah,
McDonald's here where you go
yeah.
and you're just like, "Oh, some are just not you don't wanna stay in there longer than you have to." But
Right.
then in other countries, it's like, wow, it's really nice. And a lot of ones, like at
Yeah.
Singapore, they had like just the kiosk for you to order, like the touch screen and everything, and
Yep.
everything's like really neat and clean and nice. And I'm like, oh no, I mean,
Yes.
I just,
And it's also very
yeah,
disorienting because you like think you know McDonald's, but you're like, there's a whole different system here. I got to go pick up my food from that window,
right,
and it's like it's very confusing. It's
yeah, yeah, it's a whole different experience. Not like over here.
it totally
I
is.
went to McDonald's yesterday and I was
Yes.
like, "Oh my gosh, they forgot my fries. They forgot the ice cream." Like half of my order was in the bag and half of it was missing
Right.
and some of it was wrong, but not over there.
We did have actually because we did go to the McDonald's in Rome, and there's one like right in the main train station there. And because there's just like Roman walls everywhere, there's like a Roman wall like literally in the McDonald's.
Wow.
And so we're sitting there within our Big Macs and just like taking selfies of ourselves, like eating Big Macs in front of this Roman wall. It was awesome. It was just so cool to like. There's just so much Roman stuff everywhere. It's a little bit like churches in Europe. You can just find Roman ruins everywhere you go. It doesn't matter how far flung in Europe you are. It's like, yep, the Romans were here too.
That's so cool because when can you eat a Big Mac in front of a Roman wall, right? So of course you have to take
Exactly, right?
pictures.
Yes, yes.
That's awesome.
It's an excuse to have McDonald's and like get a taste of history at the same time, right?
Yeah. See, I wonder if the Costco would have Roman walls. Missed opportunities there.
Oh, that's true. I'm gonna have to look for
Yeah.
that.
Next time you go, that's what you got to do.
I am gonna look for where the other Costco's are in Europe now and see if there's any.
And see what they offer in the food court and stuff.
Yes.
It's definitely not hot dogs, I bet you. Or not
Yeah.
plain hot dogs, at
Uh,
least.
Yeah. It is one of the fun things as you travel to different countries is just like going to the local supermarkets, right? I love that part. So, especially, it's nice doing the slow travel because, normally if you're in a country for a few days, you're staying in a hotel, you go eat out. But I like staying long enough that I'm like, I get to go hit the supermarkets and see like, what do they eat here?
Go see like where the locals go.
Exactly. Yeah. I've learned like Albanians are like super into their dairy products. And so they do some really nice yogurts. And you'll find these shops like all over the place where they'll do like all sorts of cheeses and homemade butters and it's fantastic. The bakery like next door, you can get a like loaf of, fresh baked bread for like $1. And I was like, why is our bread so expensive? Is it like all those extra ingredients they put into American bread?
Bakeries here are really expensive.
They're super expensive. Yeah.
And when I go to Asia,
Yeah, it's nice that you can get all this stuff for.
yeah, when I go to Asia, I'm like, wow, they have like so much really good and fresh bread, and it's so much
Yes,
cheaper. I'm just like, oh, I want to bring all of this home.
yes. My wife makes it a point to like always hit up the Asian bakeries because the bread is really good.
You must be getting some really good food in all the different places.
Yeah, it's been really good, and that's I guess the other thing that I've noticed is like, yeah, there's good food everywhere we've been. Obviously, Italy, nothing needs to be said about that, but Morocco is great for food. Albania, I had no idea what to expect in terms of food or culture. It's been great.
That's really cool. I'm living vicariously through you by hearing all your stories. Um, so,
Yeah.
I guess my last question that I like to ask is what's something you would tell someone who's planning to have kids or something you wish you knew before you became a parent?
Someone who's thinking about having kids, I would say do it. It's an amazing experience. I'm half joking, but half serious because I know there's a lot of folks these days who are like, I don't know, should I have kids? Like, what about the world we're going to grow up in? And I'm like, just do it. Just do it. The world's been in like far more precarious positions in its history than we are now. Do it. It's a really amazing experience. Unlike anything else. It's a little bit painful the first couple years,
Yeah.
but you can also take comfort in the fact that it's become going to be like this hazy blur in your mind too.
Because your
Once you get
mind
through
is
that
good
period,
at like blocking out
yeah,
the
you're just
pain.
like, what happened?
Yeah.
Yes, it's very good at that. It's very good at that. No, it's an amazing experience, and I think this is maybe where being in product is like helpful because product people are always about prioritizing, right? And that's basically just going to up your game in terms of time management and really focusing on what's important and things like that. So you'll manage and you'll just sort of figure out how to prioritize your life differently. Things will drop out of your life that are less important, and you'll prioritize the new things in your life that are going to bring you so much gratitude and joy. So just do it.
I love it. Just go for it, right? Don't worry about it. Just go for it.
Just go for it. Just go for it. And it's really hard. It's one of those things. I remember when I was single and I would hang out with like my married friends and they would talk about their kids and mortgages and all this stuff. And it's like, oh my God, is that really what life's gonna be like? But when you're on the other side of it, you actually realize like, oh, it's different, but it's amazing in a totally different way.
Yeah. Like some of those things are true, but then there's so much more to it.
Yes, that's right. And it's really hard to encapsulate it in words.
Yeah. Very well said. I like that. Awesome. Well, thank you, Tameez. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and stuff. And I know it's late over there, so thank you also for staying up to chat with me.
Of course, it was so great to reconnect with you and chat. I'm looking forward to listening to your back catalog of podcast episodes.
Yeah, I have quite a few now. So if you're bored,
And I'll probably get some great parenting tips from some of the people you've talked to. So I could use some.
it's so fascinating hearing people. I've been talking to people with newborns, with kids that are now grown-ups, and yeah, it's just been fascinating to hear. And I'm like taking
Yeah,
notes. I'm like, oh, I gotta try that, gotta do that. So so that's been really neat.
that's awesome. It's a great idea.
Thank you. And thanks again for taking the time.
Anytime.
Cool.
Take care,
Take
Chow.
care. Hope you have fun in the rest of your year. And let me know what you
Thanks.
find in the Costco's and McDonald's.
I will do that. I'm going to have to keep in touch and
Yeah.
do that.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, Chow.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Parenthood Bites. We hope you found our episode informative and entertaining. If you're a parent in the tech world or know someone who is, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us at chow@parenthoodbites.co, and we'll be thrilled to add your experiences to our interviews. That's chow, CHIAO, @parenthoodbites.co. And to our potential sponsors out there, if you're a business or know of one that would like to support and partner with our podcast, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can also reach us at chow@parenthoodbites.co. Thank you once again for tuning in, and we wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Until next time, take care and stay curious.